Hello, good evening.
Good evening, Vinayak. Yeah, so today is a very short session. I'll try to finish it early. Why? Because tomorrow you'll have a surprise test. Why?
Yeah,
Why? Why have I kept it? Because I wanted to catch you off guard once. One thing is that. Second, yeah, but have 24 hours to prepare. So don't 23 hours to prepare or so. Second thing is because once you finish today's class, we'll be finishing entire of microeconomic theory. So then we'll be moving on into macroeconomic theory, which is and generally a good starting point and a good indicator that you've started with macroeconomic theory is generally Keynesian model of theory of income and unemployment. Uh, so if you remember um, the documentary that we had watched, the Commanding Heights, in the first documentary after World War One, here Keynes wrote after he disagreed with the Treaty of Versailles and what resolutions the Allies wanted to pass on the Germans on the losing forces. Essentially, he he left and he wrote the theory of income and unemployment, and that theory of income and unemployment was and is till date considered as one of the biggest economic theories. It's still taught it is still taught in universities as well as in higher education. So that in itself is a good starting point. So that is why I thought maybe before we move ahead into that, you can have a test, because we had done demand, supply, elasticity, all of that, everything before production quite some time back. So the test will also allow me to understand how much you remember. And in case we've forgotten some things, then we can just go back and revise them. So it's just sort of just getting to know where you're standing and not moving too far ahead and not reaching a point where a line Joey says, and if you watch Friends ever, the line must not look like a dot. We shouldn't be that far ahead that the line is looking like a dot to us, and then that's a no point of no return essentially. So that is why the test will allow me to see how far ahead, how how much you remember, and if we have to revisit certain things, we can. But don't worry about the test. There are some demand and supply questions I've already prepared it today. There are some demand supply, marginal utility questions, and indifference curve questions. So you have to sort of expect that. Second thing is there are more questions, in fact, on production, costs and revenue curves, and all of those things. Most of it is theoretical, so you'll just type it down, so it won't take you much time tomorrow. Uh, the graph questions, you can do it and send me later. That's not an issue.
will
Yeah,
it be a 60 mark test or 80 mark test?
100 marks.
Okay.
Yeah, all questions will be compulsory. It won't be like your ISC paper format where you have one section. The first section generally is all compulsory questions, and then section two is 4 out of 6 or 3 out of 5. It won't be something like that. It will be everything, because see, all the questions will cover different aspects of entire microeconomic theory. So
This test
even
will
if you
include cost and revenue analysis too, right?
yeah,
And
there'll be more questions on that actually.
yeah,
Yeah.
and
So
also the forms of market, right?
yeah, forms
Complete.
of market also will be there. Like we'll have
Okay.
to finish the test forms today, so that will be sort of fresh in your memory.
In our school, we begin with the second chapter and said that no need to study the first chapter.
Yeah, first chapter is what the
The microeconomics and the introduction chapter.
yeah. Generally, people don't do that, but it's because the reason people don't do that is generally not very. let's say questions may come on that, but then it's not like very highly weighted. So it'll be like 1 or 2 marks. It won't be. It's almost negligible, and you can finish the introduction like within 2-3 hours. It's not very difficult to sort of understand and learn, and then write it in the paper. So that is maybe it's a good call. But yeah, so the test will have everything before if you go through the syllabus. I can send you a PDF copy. I have it with me. Everything before theory of income and employment, that's where they make the specific distinction in the syllabus, where it says macroeconomic theory, or where it's divided into 2 or 3 sections. The entire first section, so that'll be your demand, supply, utility, uh, and cost curves, revenue, all of those things, and types of markets, and how these revenue curves react to different situations being in different market situations. So, how does it react? How do the cost curves react in an imperfect competitive market? Why does it react in an imperfect competitive market if it does react in that way? So, so all those questions will come. Don't worry, it won't be very difficult. You just need to brush up. You can go through the slides. Going through the slides, slides will be more than enough. Demand and all are in the when you open the PPTs, the folder which I've shared in the Discord, that and all will be in the first one. And class 12 folder will have production, revenue, and costs and form of goods. So all of that will be in that folder. Everything we've done before production will be in the first folder along with the 11th standard PPTs that were previously created. So you can go through the PPTs, you can go through the textbooks. The answers will be the same because economics is a science, social science is generally more towards the scientific part of it. So the answers the answers more than prominently are the same till someone comes and um, changes it. So yeah. We'll just try to finish fast today because so we can then go back and start revising. So the few markets that we left out in the last class were oligopoly, monopolistic, and monopolistic is very short, but it's very similar to imperfect. It's the same basic. We'll just go through it once again. Uh, then monopoly and monospony. So you would just need to know what are the features, what are the meanings, and what do you mean, and some real life examples so you can relate to it. That's about it. So we just finish that, and let's say by 7:45 or 7:40, uh, we can just sort of finish the entire thing. So I'll just
Um,
start.
Hey,
Yeah.
interrupt. I just wanted to make sure that have we done marginal and total utility? I mean, from the chapter
Yeah.
theory of consumer behavior, right? We have done it, or haven't we?
We have done it. We have done it in when we were doing the 11th standard thing itself. We had done it. Remember?
Yeah,
Uh,
yes,
yeah.
yeah.
So marginal utility is per unit consumption. So if you're having a cold drink, so this it's very similar on a summer's hot day. If you find a shop and you're thirsty, you want to have a Pepsi or a Coke, a soft drink. So you buy the soft drink. You buy a 40 rupee soft drink. So the 41 is like a big bottle, medium sized bottle. It's not the huge one, but it's a medium sized bottle enough for one person. You
Mm.
have the first sip, you're satisfied. You want to have one more. So every sip you essentially take is satisfying that utility that you had because of the summer's heat. You felt you felt dehydrated. You wanted something to drink, so you had the soft drink. And with every sip, that dehydration or that quench of thirst that you need to satisfy itself is being solved. So every sip is the marginal utility. Every sip that you take. Total utility is the addition of all marginal utility. So it's the first sip, second sip, third sip, fourth sip, sixth sip. Now you'll eventually reach a point which is known as point of saturation. Um, so, for example, if you buy that cold drink and you then you're drinking the first sip, second sip, third sip, fourth sip, fifth sip, sixth sip. On the seventh sip, you realize that okay, it's your stomach is feeling full. Or generally with carbonated drinks, what happens is when you have too much of that carbon, you start burping a little bit and you start feeling full. So if you keep, you have to give your body a break at that moment of time for 5-10 minutes, and then you can take another sip. But if you constantly drink, you'll just feel uneasy and you'll start feeling pukey. So that is the point where you start feeling start burping a little and you feel that okay, I cannot take one more sip. That itself is your point of saturation. But if you start drinking ahead of that, you'll start feeling pukey. It's the classic example of overeating. You go to a five-star restaurant where they have a buffet, and you
Yes.
pay 700 or 800 for it. Now generally people generally unless you're super rich, unless you're Ambani, or one of the top 500 richest people in India, your trips won't be as frequent as them to 5-star restaurants. So the idea is to eat as much as possible in that one go, because you don't know when you're going to get the next chance. And then that is the classic example of overeating in a five-star restaurant where you overeat because you don't know when the next chance when your next chance is. So that when you start feeling extremely full and you feel that okay, I cannot eat more than this, that is your point of saturation. But if you keep eating more than that, your total utility, that utility that you had, okay, I'm in a five-star restaurant and I must eat, with every morsel of food that you're swallowing or every starter that you're eating, it starts dropping because the human body cannot sort of take it, and you start feeling pukey. Your stomach starts paining. You essentially overeat. So that is
Yes,
when,
that's
so it sort of goes up
okay.
like that. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So the curve will be something like that. I'll just show you a utility curve.
Uh, could you remind me
Yeah,
where we did it till? I think we have done it till consumer equilibrium, right? Consumer equilibrium through indifference curve approach. Have we
yeah.
done
We've done
till that?
indifference curve. We
Yes,
finished
yes,
indifference curve.
yes.
Yeah. So I'll just show you the.
I haven't
So this.
marked this in my book, it seems. So that's what I was asking.
Yeah. So this essentially is a marginal utility curve. So as you keep on eating, your utility is being satisfied. Essentially, your utility will start decreasing with every additional unit of the good that you're consuming. This is the
Yes.
point of satiety or saturation, and beyond this is where you feel full. You keep consuming, everything starts dropping. It's like very similar to the production curve, but instead of manufacturing things and considering costs and revenue, what you're doing over here is you're considering consumer behavior. You're seeing how much utility does a consumer have towards a certain good or service, and how fast does that utility essentially drop once the consumer starts consuming that good or service that he or she desires or wants. Um, so yeah, so that is that indifference curve is something like this. So if you remember, this is in the if you ever attempt CA, the ICA exam, which is the CA exam, you find this sort of a graph in a textbook. And what this suggests is that you are a consumer. Again, we are considering consumer behavior. So you are a consumer. You have a limited amount of income, but that limited amount of income must be spent on two goods. Now, it doesn't matter how you spend it or how many quantities you spend it. So essentially, points A, B, C, and D is showing you that indifference towards quantities of those two goods consumed. So I'm indifferent even if I buy 12 units of clothing or 1 unit of food. I'm similarly indifferent if I buy 6 units of clothing and 2 units of food. Similarly, 4 units and 3 of each. And the point D measures 3 units of clothing and 4 units of food. So indifference basically means is that it, I have an option of two goods, clothing and food, I don't care if I'm on point A, B, C, or D. Why? Because I want because my entire objective is that I must get either I must get either clothing or I must either get food. But I have to get I not either. I have to get both of them. It doesn't matter in what quantities I essentially get them. Now this might change in case I decide to have a family. So when I'm having a family, because there are more number of individuals, there may be multiple curves, multiple indifference curves, but it could also mean a single indifference curve because it depends if those other individuals in the family are earning income. Now, how does it differ? But in just in case they are not earning any income, what happens is that I may prefer less amount of clothing because I have more number of individuals now living with me who are not earning income. So, like for example, children. But I must ensure that they get enough amount of food to survive. So I may buy less amount of clothing. So then you see that drop from A to B. If I have another child, then it'll be B2C. So one more unit of food because there's another individual that I have to take care of. This also is the similar thing that you'll find in the same book, which is an indifference map. Now, why are there multiple curves in this specific picture? Is because these different amount of curves refer to different amounts of income. Therefore, it refers to different percentages of purchasing power. What is essentially purchasing power? Purchasing power is the ability of a certain individual or a household to purchase goods and services with respect to the income that the household or that individual is earning. So, for example, Ambani will have a much bigger purchasing power than I have, and I may have a much bigger purchasing power than most probably a security guard may have, because the income levels differentiate based on the income levels differentiate. I'm getting paid a higher salary. Ambani's get has a, is being paid a much higher salary, as well as he has enough savings to last for the next 10 generations. So this IC3, IC2, IC1 refers to purchasing power. How does it refer to purchasing power? Simply because as the curve moves towards more towards this hand side, more towards the right hand side of the
Yes.
second quadrant. Yeah,
No, no. Actually, I was just agreeing with you.
yeah. No, no. Say, go ahead.
No, I was just asking that assumptions of this curve analysis. I mean, I mean, uh,
Yeah,
which curve actually shows transitivity of choice?
transit. So that would be these. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So all goods, so essentially that what it means, that all combinations of x and y are above the curve are preferable to combinations along or below the curve. What does that mean? Consumers will essentially prefer moving from IC1 to IC2. Why? Because one thing is that the income has increased, therefore the purchasing power has increased. And the two of the essential properties of these curves are that the income is fixed. One thing, income is fixed in the sense that at a certain moment of time, income can increase over a period of time, and that is preferable to the consumer because the consumer prefers to move from IC1 to IC2 to IC3 over a period of time, because that means that they can purchase more of those goods and services with the purchasing power that is there. And the second important property is that uh, second important property, sorry, is that all the income essentially has to be spent on these two goods or services. So it has to be spent on good X and good Y. Third one is that the consumer must have both those goods. So that is why whenever someone tells you what is something that cannot happen with an indifference curve, that means it cannot touch either of the accesses. So for example, you cannot have, I'll just do this, I'll just do so. You cannot have, let's say this is an indifference curve, you cannot have an indifference curve going on like this. This essentially cannot happen. Why this cannot happen is because what does what does this what does this imply? This is y-axis, this is x-axis, this is, let's say, good one, this is good two. Over here, if this is a point P, what does this mean? This essentially means, if you write it in x and y format, 0, comma 10. Similarly, it cannot be something like this, because this would then mean, point Q would then mean something like, what is this over here? This would be, let's say, 10, comma 0. Similarly, I'm just using mirror opposites. What does this mean? Even this is not possible. Indifference curves do not intersect with each other at any point. So we'll get into the intersection at a little bit later on. But what does this mean? 0, comma 10, 10, comma 0 essentially means that if you're in point P or Q, you're not purchasing the other good that needs to be purchased. And indifference curves have an essential principle that you need to have both goods and services, both those combinations with you. So essentially, A, B, and C that we saw, those are different combinations of goods. It could be 1, comma 10, 2, comma 9, it could be 3, comma 5. It essentially does not matter. All those combinations are favorable for the consumer because the utility of that consumer for those two goods is being satisfied. But you cannot be in a situation where you're not purchasing one of the goods. You have, in that combination A, B, and C, you have to purchase both. Both have to be there. That's why it's called a combination. Now, the reason why an indifference curve cannot intersect. So you can see that IC1 and IC2 are intersecting. Now, this cannot happen because of the fact that if, let's say, IC1 is intersecting with IC2, that would basically mean IC1 is equal to IC2, which it is not. So remember, we just discussed that if we just look, if we just, let's say, we erase the intersection, the points where it's touching the curve. So we just draw this points, and let's say this is IC1 and this is IC2. Now, generally, what is happening here is that we saw this, we saw indifference map, like you had different curves like this. If, let's say, this is intersecting with this like this, it's actually, I'll just erase everything. So let's say we had an indifference curve like this. We had 1, 2, and a third one intersecting like this. See, not like that, but let's say it was intersecting above a little bit. Let's say it was intersecting above, means that, so something like this. This can essentially cannot happen because it's IC1, IC2, IC3. IC2 cannot intersect, this is IC2, the lower one, and the upper one is IC3. This essentially cannot happen is because, see, when we are, what were we considering, what is the consumer like? The consumer likes moving from one to the second to the third. And that reflects an increase in income and an increase in the purchasing power. Therefore, the consumer can spend the increased income purchasing more goods and services for the household or for the individual on his or herself. Now, it cannot intersect. When this intersection between IC2 and IC3 happens, that means it shows that IC2 is equal to IC3. But when we look at it mathematically, it does not fit the question. So when we say IC2 is equal to IC3, what we essentially will then mean, if you look at mathematics, if when we see IC2 is equal to IC3, we mean that then any combination of goods, let's say this is A and B, is equal. What would that mean? It would be equal to A is then it would mean that A is equal to B, comma, no, A is equal to C, sorry, and uh, B is equal to D. Similarly, we'll also be able to say E is equal to D and C is equal to B. But essentially, when we draw the graph, we'll draw the points from here. This is one point. We'll draw one more point from here. Then we extend this curve a little bit above because it's not fitting. We draw one here and we draw the line downwards. And then we draw one more line here to depict D. Now, when you're looking at these points in this study badly drawn diagram, do you think that these are equal mathematically? Because there are different points in the graph. This essentially is a mathematical difference that we are seeing. But because this is intersecting at point X, IC3 then is equal to IC2 is equal to IC3, which would then mean that all the points on IC2 and IC3 are equal. But essentially, when we draw the graph and we see there is a mathematical difference. So this is one exception. So it cannot touch the axis, cannot intersect each other, and those are the two most important rules that you have to sort of look into when. And the third thing is different multiple curves across the same graph, or moving more towards the right hand side, moving more above and away from the origin. That basically means that with every that means that with every rightward shift and shift away from the origin, that means that the purchasing power is increasing because there is an income increase, and that is why the consumer can afford more goods and services. Any other doubts? Yeah. No. So we'll start with the types of market because it's already half an hour in. Uh, so I'll just share my screen. So as we said, the first form of market is oligopolies. I'll just try to do. We had finished most of the previous market forms by discussing perfect competition and how it sort of functions with perfect competition. Now, oligopoly is a form of a market when a small group of businesses, and the minimum number that has to be there in those sort of businesses in an oligopoly is two, and they basically control the entire market for a certain product or service. So there has to be a minimum of two businesses in the market that control essentially everything for a particular good or service. And what it does, it gives them a huge influence over prices, factors such as price and other aspects of the market, that is distribution, advertisement rates, all of those things are under their control because they have a controlling, they and a group of group of other competitors, which is generally 2 to 10 or 2 to 5 or 2 to 8 number of people, a number of corporations. They control everything, and they will come together and decide, okay, this month we will price it at this much and we'll only distribute this much to this area or this much to that area, depending on how much revenue we can essentially earn. So prominent examples are soft drinks. So if you ever see a bottle of Pepsi or Coke ever, just see, even if you Pepsi, Coke, Mirinda, Sprite, 7 Up, all of these range of soft drinks, Fanta that we have, Mountain Dew. All of them are either controlled by Coca-Cola or Pepsi. Like I think so. Coca-Cola owns Sprite. It also owns Mountain Dew. I'm not sure about Mountain Dew, but Pepsi also owns Nimbus, Minute Maid. So all of these companies essentially are servicing the soft drinks, juices, certain juices. But essentially, all of these are controlled. There are only two major companies, Pepsi and Coca-Cola, who essentially control a large section of the soft drink and the juice market. So you have not only Pepsi and Coca-Cola, which is the brand names of those companies, but you also have Thumbs Up, which is owned by Coca-Cola at this moment of time. You also have Nimbus that is owned by Pepsi, Sprite that is owned by Coca-Cola. Even though they're selling it under different brands based on the flavoring that you're purchasing, it is still the money is still going to that those two companies. Second is the car market. You have Maruti in India. You have Maruti. Uh, you have Volkswagen. Then you have uh, which other company? Blanking on names. You have
Audi.
Mahindra, and yeah, and in Europe you have only a certain set of cars that people purchase. You have an Audi, you have BMW, you have Mercedes Benz, you have a Lexus, which is also with Lexus. Then you have there's another brand called Peugeot. You have Fiat, and you have another few which is the other Fiat, and you have this thing, uh, Ferrari and the Lamborghini sort of
You have
those
Ford.
companies. Also Ford. But essentially, how many do they come up to? 9 to 10, and they essentially control a large section of the car market. They decide how many cars should be manufactured. So Mercedes-Benz essentially can decide how many cars should be manufactured in India. Similarly, they decide how many cars should be manufactured in the US, and then in the homeland in Germany itself, or in Europe in different countries, they have different global headquarters in different countries. So they essentially decide. So the one in Mercedes-Benz in India is based in Pune, around 20 kilometers from where I live. They have an entire big factory and the office building, everything is there. But they serve the entire country in a sense. So they can then decide based on the market demand how much you should manufacture. But they also do collusion. What is collusion? Collusion is what the OPEC nations do. OPEC is also another example of an oligopoly based market where you have the Middle East, which is a petroleum rich country, or a petroleum rich group of countries. So you have Saudi Arabia, you have UAE, you have Qatar, you have so many all these different countries in that entire area. But one, and that is why, even though Saudi Arabia is a very autocratic dictatorial state, but they essentially do not allow freedom of speech and expression. They'll kill you on public execution right in front of everyone, and no one can do anything about it, is because of the oil. Because they hold a general controlling interest and they can dictate terms to other countries on how they sell the oil and who they sell the oil to, they people overlook what they do domestically. But that's a different chapter, and that's a different discussion altogether. But the idea is that because they have such large reserves with them of oil, and they hold a controlling interest for petroleum, diesel, and everything that is around the world, they come together and they decide, okay, we will sell it at this price, or we will reduce supply to create a inflationary situation. So these are oligopoly based markets. The third and the last one is search. Publishing houses. Again, you have few big 4 or 5 publishing houses. We have smaller publishing houses, but it's difficult for them to compete in that market. Social media, and social media is a very prominent example in this, because if you see, WhatsApp, Instagram is owned by Facebook. Only Twitter and YouTube is also, I think, so owned by Google. I'm not sure. I didn't just confirm that. LinkedIn is owned by Microsoft. So What you essentially have is two or three companies, just Facebook, Microsoft, Twitter, actually controlling a large section of all social media platforms. It's only now recently, with the new WhatsApp policy laws coming into place, that you have offshoots like Telegram, alternative messaging platforms, or Telegram, and I think so. There's another one. I don't remember the name, but Signal, another platform like Signal and Telegram that ensure privacy to the user, and they are owned by people who've created, who were part of the WhatsApp team. Uh, so you have a major section like Mark Zuckerberg owning a majority of large social media platforms, and then deciding how much he should charge for advertisements, how much he should charge for sponsorships, all of those things. Even setting up a page or creating a subscription base, you have to pay Facebook. How much are those charges for? You have to pay Instagram. How much are those charges? So all of that is essentially decided by Mark Zuckerberg and all of these set of companies. So entry essentially in this sort of a market is very easy. You can enter. There's no problem, because you've seen a lot of startups in recent years coming up, especially in India. You have a lot of startups that are coming up and trying to make it big, like how Bill Gates, Steve Wozniak, and Steve Jobs, and all, Larry Page, and all of these people, they made it big by starting their own startups, and then later became Google, Microsoft, and Apple. But it's easy to enter the market, and people are trying to make their mark, but then it's difficult to compete. Why? Because of the fact that these major companies, these 2 to 10 people, they hold a controlling interest, and they can essentially offer lower prices, offer lower discounts to actually beat out the costs of the new person entering the market. So if you are a new person who's entered into the market, your establishment costs, so the costs that you have to incur when you start the business, are a lot. But when you compare that with a person who's already been in the business for the past 10 years, it's not that difficult for them, because they can offer discounts, they can mass produce, and they also have the goodwill of their consumers. And more people, you have to convince more people to buy your product rather than theirs. So that itself is so competing in that market structure with the advertisements, with the controlling interest, is difficult. So certain characteristics are degree of concentration. Degree of concentration is nothing but how many people are there in that business, or how many people are there in that market, and how many people are part of that business, and how, based on that number of people, and how does the market take form, and how does the market take shape. So when we consider monopolies where there's only one seller, it is much less concentrated. So oligopoly, as you saw, it needs at least 2 people. So monopoly is one, oligopoly is two. So you need, so the concentration of people in that particular business is more than monopolies, because monopolies is one, but it is but it is less concentrated than monopolies. No, sorry, this is wrong. It is supposed to be more concentrated than monopolies and less concentrated than open market. An open market, essentially what it means is that open market will be more closer to a perfect, imperfect competitive market. It won't be a perfectly competitive market, it will be an imperfectly competitive market. Um, so, so this would be an imperfectly competitive market. This would be a monopoly. And so somewhere in the middle between both, you have an oligopoly, where there is not greater than one, but lesser than 50, or some lesser than 10, or 50. So collusion is always present. It's not something illegal. Of course, it's looked at the bad way, because you are using your own internal mechanisms to actually control how much you price certain goods and services. So if you remember, just recently, this has happened. Um, there was something known as the European Super League, which was being formed by the uh, big earning revenue clubs in football. What that essentially meant was to ensure that this revenue that comes in is there constantly for the next 10 years. Similar to in the American system, or similar to the IPL. So it'll be more, this will be more closer to IPL. In the Indian Premier League, so in the English Premier League, which basically football is in it is there in all leagues. It's in the German, Spanish. All the leagues have the system of promotion and relegation. That basically means that if there are multiple leagues in a certain country where the domestic clubs play, so Manchester United, Manchester City are Premier League clubs who play at the highest tier. So if either of these clubs finish at the bottom of the table, they get relegated to the bottom half, like the lower league, and those top three teams in that league go to the Premier League. This happens every year. Now with IPL, this essentially does not happen. Even if you finish last, of course it looks bad, but you will not be removed from the league. You won't be going down to a lower league and forced to spend a year there. What essentially would have, so the Super League sort of aims to do that. Why does it aim to do that? Because it wanted to ensure that the revenues keep coming. So a lot of sponsorship deals in football are based on the club playing well, on winning trophies, on making a mark. So if you do not qualify for the Champions League, that means you do not finish in the top four and get a chance to play with Europe's best clubs around the world, around Europe, sorry, you will lose your sponsorship, your sports sponsor. So advertising rights and all that. So that is what the IPL is essentially. Uh, so what the point that I'm trying to make is that a lot of these clubs, these big owners of these clubs, who had a controlling interest, and only there were
Just a
10 or
minute, just a
yeah,
minute,
yeah,
just a minute. Uh,
yeah.
uh, I think it is time. I guess. Why is the dashboard music is on? Yeah, it is off now. Yeah,
Okay.
please continue.
Yeah. So just give me 1 minute. Yeah. So what the Super League did is these owners had a controlling interest. They were 10 of them or 8 of them together. They came together and decided that we'll do this and we'll ensure that we create a league for the best teams in Europe, and there won't be relegation, there won't be removal, there won't be promotion of any kind, and that will allow our sponsors to keep giving us money, um, and we won't run out of business. Now, when this broke out, the fans were very angry. Players, former players who played for these clubs, were very angry, as well as veteran managers were also very angry that if you do this, the competitiveness of football, that you don't know which team will eventually win the Premier League, that sort of goes. So I think so. It was 2 or 3 years back where a small time club like Leicester City won the Premier League and shocked the world. So if you had bet like even £5 on Leicester winning the Premier League 10 months before, there were a few people who did that. But by the time they won it, they earned, I think so, around 6 million, because the odds were so against Leicester. So that sort of competitiveness goes. So oligopoly, that itself was oligopoly. Collusion, that itself was collusion, where people come together to decide prices, distribution, advertisements, all of those things. So products would be very similar. For example, it could be like products would be very similar. Uh, for example, it would be different kinds of detergents. They may come in similar packing, or they may look similar, or the powder color, or the color could be very same. Uh, and so this sort of encourages competition. The only thing that they can change essentially is how do you advertise it. So, for example, pure salt is salt. It doesn't matter how you consume it. It gives you the same sort of iodine that your body needs. But if you advertise it well, so Puro advertised it as something. So they made it look different, little different, and they made it sound like it is a very good type of salt you should consume, and that drew consumers away from Tata Salt to Puro, and that creates competition. How you pack it, the packing of Puro is smaller. It looks more better. Tata Salt is big. It doesn't look that great. So then that sort of changes how consumers look at things. So how you market it essentially also, even though the product is similar, they're just selling you salt, not selling you something different. But the way you package it and the way you advertise it, that goes a long way. Competition still exists. So both all these competitors, even though they can come together and collude and then decide how much the prices should be, they can also compete with each other. So one prominent example of this is airlines. So the number of airlines in India are limited. It's Indigo, Go Air. I'm talking about the domestic, like budgeted airlines. Go Air, then Indigo, then Jet Airways is no longer existent, but Vistara, all of these are there are only two or four or five who offer domestic uh, short short journey travels. And when you look at US, you have the American Airlines, you have Delta, you have you have also foreign like you also have Qatar Airways, you have Emirates. So you have a concentration of few players, but with even within that, they will have a competitive market where maybe Emirates offers a lower if you Emirates the rewards program. So if you have enough flying miles, you can actually take first a business an executive class airline executive class ticket. And what that basically means is you get an entire cabin to yourself with a TV, with a sofa set. It's like an apartment essentially within the plane, with a separate individual shower and a washroom, as well as a bed, and with personal service from an attendant. So, for example, to reach that level, you may just need 2,000 flying miles in Emirates. But if you want to reach it with Qatar, you need 2,700. So that itself, that rewards program that gives consumers rewards if you fly with them more, that that can exist within oligopolies where there are few controlling businesses, few controlling corporations that control a certain market or a certain business. So as I said, whenever someone new enters the market, the production costs are always high for them, but not very high for those who have already been in the market for years because they are mass producing things. So therefore, because it's mass production, they get high volume discounts from the supplier of raw materials and all those other things, as well as you also have the goodwill of consumers that this person, this manufacturer has been supplying rice or wheat to me for in packaged form for the past 30 years. Why should I go for someone who's new? I know for the past 30 years, no one has fallen ill. Everyone is the quality is good. So to break that goodwill and to convince people to buy your product is also very difficult. You need to spend more on advertising. You need to spend more on getting FGDs done, getting people interested in the product. So all of that doesn't need to be done by the person who's already been in the market for an X number of years. Other barriers may include patented resources. So this is a very big thing in the US where a lot of pharmaceutical products are actually patented. So insulin, for example, if you buy insulin in India, insulin would not cost you more. It will cost you like 600 or 700. That will be like $10. You go to the US, it'll not cost. It'll cost you a minimum of $100, and people have lost lives because they couldn't get the insulin. Why does this happen? Because whenever a certain pharmaceutical company comes up with their own insulin, they patent it, and then because of the patent, they can easily charge a very high amount of fees to the consumers to purchase it, and other competitors cannot use that product or use that product, the method of manufacture of that product without asking the pharmaceutical company because it's a patented process because it has a patent on it, and this could, if you do that, could lead to a lawsuit which would lose money for your business. So essentially, you have patents on certain products and goods that do not allow new people to enter and do it. In India, we do not have that because a lot of pharmaceutical companies, what they do is instead of following that same process, they reverse engineer the manufacturing and then they make a separate drug that looks completely different. Same thing what Flipkart did with Amazon. Flipkart essentially copied everything what Amazon's algorithms, Amazon's way of searching things, and they just copied it, just changed the way the code is written. But the end result was the same, and they made it look different. So it wasn't a copyright or a patent violation as such. Again, on certain businesses, you have government licenses that government prefers certain manufacturers because of the trust. If you're a new person, they may not trust you immediately. You may need contacts to get in. So that itself also is another barrier, and it requires say, specific period of time until until then the government trusts you. For example, in nuclear material, that itself, to get that license, you may have to go through a lot of checks and balances to actually get that thing done. But for a person who's already in that market, it is not that difficult. So monopolistic means huge number of businesses, but all of them sell same product, but it looks quite different. There's product differentiation. There is a purpose, an attempt purposely done to make it look different, to make it look classic, to make it look. Some people mean to make it give a more retro feel to get nostalgia, so people buy it. Some people may try and make it look more future, make the printing and all that look more futuristic, so more people buy it. So based on that, product differentiation, product differentiation is there. Every product which it sold, the firms are essentially price makers. In perfect competition, they are price takers because the consumers decide what it should be priced because they know the costs of manufacture, they know the profit margin. So in a pure competitive market, firms are price takers. Over here, they are price makers based on the cost of production and profit margins. They can decide what price they should price the product and how much they should produce. All of that they can decide on their own. Knowledge is there, but it's not perfect. So, for a very good example of this is the Zomato reviews that you read online for a wide variety of restaurants. You may open Google or you may open Zomato, you may click on Google Maps to a certain restaurant and you may see the reviews. Okay, 50 people have given 5 star, 4 people have given 20, 20 people have given 4 star reviews, and 30 people have given 3 stars, so on and so forth. Now, that is their own personal opinion or the personal taste and preferences on the way that they liked the food that was being served. It is widely spread. Like the information that information, those reviews, essentially, those reviews are knowledge banks. They are telling other people who haven't visited the restaurant how good the food is or how bad the food is and whether you should go on. So that knowledge is there, but it is not perfect because you as an individual do not know that. You have to go to the restaurant, you have to eat that food to actually gain, okay, how good it is. So for you, perfect knowledge, what does perfect knowledge mean? Perfect knowledge means that everyone knows how good it is or everyone knows how bad it is, how bad the food is. But you as a person do not know because you haven't visited. Your knowledge bank is the reviews that have been online. So the knowledge is being widely spread amongst the participants or the readers, but you have to go and taste it for it to actually find out if it's good or bad. Free entry and exit, you can enter and exit the market. So you can easily enter it and exit it. So for example, BlackBerry and LG, they entered the phone market on earlier and now they basically exited it.
Is lava existent here?
I think so. Lava, I don't know if lava is there anymore. I'm not sure. I heard of it. Is it there? I'm not sure. I don't know. Maybe I'll just go and check on it later. But if it's there in the market, then they're still there. That's about it. Yeah. So entrepreneur again has a great role because they have to always consider all the risks that are required with operations. So risk could be, am I advertising it the right way? Will the advertisements work? third could be how do I package it. There shouldn't be any package mishaps, and that would lead to the consumers losing goodwill of the company. We have to take care of that. Yeah, should I distribute it in this region? If it's distributed in in this region, will everything sell? So all of that risks have to be considered. How do you, based on those risks, you have to plan certain initiatives and make up plans on how to sell it, where to sell it, how much to provide to this district and that district, for example, based on how much the market of the product in that district is. So all of that is in the hands of the entrepreneurs. They have a greater role in deciding. So there is product marketing, human capital, and distribution based differentiation. Now, product differentiation, as I already said, is making your product look different, making it look more snazzy, or copying what other people are doing, so that people have an alternative choice to purchase. So if iPhone comes up with four cameras, even Samsung will come up with four cameras. Similarly, even Xiaomi will come up with four cameras. Why? Because people who cannot afford Apple will go for Samsung. People who can't afford Samsung will go for Xiaomi. So that is product differentiation, where you intentionally make things look similar but also a little bit different so that people buy it. The way you market it is also different, because I remember Flipkart had this series of ads where because it was a new company back then, where they showed children essentially as adults, and people like that way. Or for the example, the Hutch. I don't know if you remember Vodafone. Before Vodafone was Vodafone, it was Hutch. So Hutch had that pug, had a pug, that breed of dog would be there in every ad essentially. So that was something new. Idea did not do something like that. Amazon did not need to do that with Flipkart, because Amazon already was a global company with goodwill. All they had to do was offer discounts and do some sales on some specific days to make people purchase it. And also, Amazon has better deals on electronics, so again, they didn't have to do all this marketing. Then after the pug came those Zuzu, or those characters, those stick figures or something, that was done by Vodafone. So every company has a different way of marketing it that looks different than maybe Idea or Reliance. Reliance also was there at some point of time in the phone market. I don't know if they are there, but not. I don't think so. They are there as much as they were previously. Uh, Human capital basically means that people within your employees are basically better skilled.